Good morning and welcome to day 2 of AP's Press Freedom Week. My name is Justin Pritchard. I'm an investigative reporter and editor here at the Associated Press. If you were with us yesterday, thank you for coming back. And if this is your first session for the week, welcome. This week, AP is hosting 5 days of conversations about press freedom, independent journalism, and what it takes to report the facts in a world where that work is increasingly under threat. Today's conversation is about accountability journalism and investigative journalism. The investigation we're discussing today is a groundbreaking collaboration among the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the AP, and Frontline from PBS, of course, the acclaimed documentary maker. And this collaboration did indeed include a documentary, as you just saw. Together, these newsrooms revealed how the nation's carpet manufacturing industry in Northwest Georgia continued using harmful chemicals for years, even as the scientific evidence mounted that the consequences would be grave. Today, those chemicals are found in the local water, soil, wildlife, and in the blood of residents. It's exactly the kind of journalism that press freedom exists to protect, and exactly the kind of journalism that becomes harder to do when press freedom erodes. I'm joined today by 3 journalists who worked on this investigation, and I do have to say I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Jason Deeren is an investigative reporter at the Associated Press. Dylan Jackson is an investigative reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And Aaron Texera is an editor at Frontline, who directs their local journalism initiative. Welcome. We'll hear from each of them about the challenges of this reporting, what it's like to collaborate across newsrooms on a major project like this, and the real-world impacts that projects like this can have. One quick word before we start. Investigations like this take months of reporting, fact-checking, legal resources, any number of resources. So please consider making a donation at apnews.com/donate or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Your support helps sustain this kind of journalism, and we are very grateful for it. Thank you. All right. Welcome again, everyone. Just want to jump right into it. For folks got a flavor from that trailer of what this story was about, but let's go to the beginning of this. Let's talk about how this story came to be. Dylan, this started with you in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. At some point in 2025, folks, your editor, came to AP's local investigative reporting program, then directed by Ron Nixon, and we hatched this plan to bring in Frontline as well as AL.com in Alabama and the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina, for sort of a region-wide look at this issue of forever chemicals, PFAS, and the carpet industry, which I did not know had its almost worldwide headquarters in Northwest Georgia. That is something I learned very early on in this project. Why don't you just take us to the beginning of it? How did you learn about this? What made you so interested in pursuing it?
Yeah, I mean, Northwest Georgia and the carpet industry had been on our radars for a couple of years by that point. We understood that there was broad-based contamination there of these PFAS chemicals, known as, forever chemicals by a lot of people, because they persist in people and the environment, and it takes a lot for them to break down. For many years, these chemicals were used in household brands such as Scotchgard and Stainmaster and applied onto carpets for decades. Over the years, we had been following what was going on there. That area has been defined in a lot of ways by lawsuits that have proliferated across the region to try to pay for and address this. The AJC got involved in litigation to unseal settlement documents a couple of years ago when one of the cities settled with a major chemical supplier. But as these lawsuits continue to move their way through the courts, it became increasingly clear the sort of connection that the carpet industry and the knowledge the carpet industry had of these chemicals. And for us in an investigative team, that sort of elevates the story, right? I mean, it's one thing to know that these chemicals are dangerous, but in, lots of media all over, in lots of media, the big story is how it came to be and who is responsible. And we started to investigate that very question, right? At what point did these carpet companies know about the danger of these chemicals? What did they do in response to this knowledge? And how did that interact with this community, which for decades, generations have relied on the carpet industry to sustain their lives, to feed their families. And increasingly, we were talking to people and finding out that these very same people were being poisoned, essentially. They were being, their water was being polluted. They were finding these chemicals in their blood. And there was this tension, right, between a city that relies on an industry that has turned around and has, treated them that way in a certain sense. So, that's sort of how we got involved. We started driving up there and really interviewing people, trying to get our arms around the scope of this and, how people felt about it. And that's when we reached out to the Associated Press.
So thank you. So those are some of the questions you're asking with accountability journalism, investigative journalism. How did this happen? Why are we in this place? Who was responsible? Right? These are the types of things, not just what happened, because as you point out, there were lawsuits. People were suing each other. People were suffering health consequences that can be linked to exposure to these chemicals. So it's not a question of what's going on. Some of that was playing out in the courts. The question is, how do we get here? Why did it go like this? And kind of perhaps looking forward, what can be done?
Correct. This idea of accountability and drawing these lines of accountability is very important for us. It sort of takes the story to the next level and makes things more actionable and drives impact in a way that just exploring the problem and the fact that it exists, just doesn't quite get there.
But let's go just a little bit more into kind of the context for this. So these forever chemicals, they were the big thing that they brought to the carpet industry was stain resistance, right? That was the thing that carpet really began to rely on them for. And they relied on them for several decades until there was a big announcement. You mentioned Scotchgard, and the EPA made a big announcement essentially saying what? This was 2001, right?
Yeah, around 2000, EPA and 3M, who's the manufacturer of Scotchgard, released a statement saying that they are reformulating and pulling Scotchgard off the market and reformulating it. And the reason was that one of the thousands of PFAS chemicals that were used, one of the thousands of PFAS chemicals that are used more broadly and one that was specifically used in Scotchgard was beginning to be linked to health and human safety issues. And so much so that they made the extraordinary step of just pulling this key chemical off the market. And Scotchgard had been relied on at that point by the carpet industry for decades.
So Jason, what do? They need stain resistance. Customers expect stain resistance. Before they pull it, the manufacturer 3M has come to them and shared these concerns, right? That's one of the findings that the carpet industry, spoken broadly, knew about these health concerns, or at least that they were being raised, if not evidence mounting, before it was public, and then continued using not just Scotchgard up to that point that it became public, but then sort of how do they cope with this? They need the properties of these chemicals, but they can't use Scotchgard.
Right. So one of the things when we got involved kind of early on after Dylan and his colleagues came to us, one of the big questions was, what kind of proof do we have that they knew that the companies themselves, the carpet companies, knew that there were dangers associated with these chemicals that they were using and that were being released into the environment and the communities in which they operated. We, through the documents that Dylan and others collected, were able to locate emails between 3M and the carpet companies and notes from meetings between these two entities that kind of detailed some of the information that was shared with them in the years running up to this EPA announcement that they would pull this from the market. And so there was that was the first, kind of light bulb for me that went off that said, okay, well, wow, this was years before this thing's pulled from the market. They know that there's a real concern here. And then what they do from there after they pull this from the market is the way that, kind of our chemical regulation works is, well, that chemical gets pulled from the market, but there are very closely related, scientifically closely related chemicals that do kind of the same thing that aren't, because what's regulated or what's the chemical of concern is one very specific type of PFAS, but there are all these hundreds, thousands of other types of PFAS that they could turn to that weren't as studied or as understood, at least by EPA. And so that's what they did. They started turning to alternatives that provided the same kind of stain resistance. And then we would find out, a short time later, matter of a couple of years, that those replacement chemicals also posed very similar health and human safety issues.
Dylan, you mentioned that you spent a lot of time driving up from Atlanta to Northwest Georgia. Can you just give folks a little bit of a flavor of what that region is like, but also very specifically when you go there, how you sense the carpet industry, and indeed even how do these just explain to us, how do these chemicals get into the environment and then ultimately into human blood, right? They're part of the carpet production process. How do they go from that carpet mill over to someone's bloodstream?
Yeah, so a couple of the major cities in Northwest Georgia, Rome, Calhoun, Dalton, they're about less than 2 hours from Atlanta. And I've probably made, I don't know, dozens of trips up there over the last year. And the thing you take away from that area, I mean, one of the first things you notice is just how beautiful the landscape is there. I mean, I remember when me and my colleague, Justin Price at the AJC first went up there, we wanted to take the time to drive by a field that is well known to be contaminated with PFAS. And, PFAS is odorless, it's colorless, it's functionally invisible. And, we drove past that pasture and it was bucolic. It was just absolutely beautiful. Rolling hills, animals, pristine looking streams. And it really put things into perspective for us when we went up there. And so typically the way this works is that, these carpet mills, which are all over the area, all over the region, they used these chemicals in their most, in many ways, they're most often their dyeing process, all sorts of production as they, put out these carpets. And the PFAS chemicals would run off into their drains in this process. And the vast majority of PFAS was taken legally through city sewer drains and to water treatment facilities. But the problem is these facilities were not and are not able to filter out PFAS. So essentially the chemicals would go through the typical treatment process, but come out unaltered. And over the years, that means that these chemicals would be put back into the water system and contaminate the water, be picked up by drinking water systems and enter into people's drinking water. It would stick to the sediments in the soils, and it would be used as the waste from these wastewater treatment processes would be used for fertilizer, which would then be applied to farms. So there are many sort of pathways where PFAS can get into the environment, and it's almost total in the breadth of what we're looking at there. I mean, as you mentioned, it's in the soil, it's in the drinking water, it's in the fish, it's in people's blood because they consume these things. And so I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at there. And for a lot of people up there, it's overwhelming. I mean, there's some awareness of some people, but a lot of sources had a lot of people I spoke to just really didn't have any idea. And we would test the river near their home, or we'd test their well, and they would learn that this contamination issue is much closer to them than they thought. And so it was a really interesting process in, going up there and really trying to get our arms around it. And really, in many ways, these folks would learn about these chemicals for the first time through us. And then, we would sort of build that relationship. And there'd be almost a sense of like shared learning. I'm learning about their parent that worked in a carpet mill, or their son, or their, uncle. And they would learn about, how contaminated their area is, and how that could affect them or get into their water. So it was a very interesting process to go through.
Absolutely. So the technology exists to clean these things from industrial wastewater, right? There are processes that you can use, reverse osmosis, carbon filters as well. But in this area, at least the one of the cities you mentioned, Dalton, the wastewater goes from the carpet mills, and the process there does not take the PFAS chemicals out. And then from there, they dispose of it in ways that it gets back into the river. You mentioned how beautiful it is up there. There's a very quite a vast river system. I haven't been, but Jason, you have, and we'll talk about that in a second. It gets back into the river, right? From there, from the wastewater treatment plant. It's doesn't sound pleasant, but it's true. And then those rivers where the treated sewage essentially ends up are then the source of drinking water for people downriver, including into Alabama. They pull up that water from the river. Their drinking water treatment process does not clean out the PFAS, and now they're drinking it too.
Correct.
Jason, you headed down there to check out the area with Dylan. That's part of the film. There's some fun moments in there, including some door knocks, as we call them in the biz, that you did. Why don't you, before we talk about that, why don't you just kind of frame up here, when you learned about this, you mentioned some of the emails and whatnot. I remember you starting to get kind of excited as you read more and more of what Dylan had collected, and then started collecting your own stuff as well, including, human sources. What did you expect sort of from the start out of this project? Kind of what did you envision? Did you see it kind of go in the direction that it did?
Yeah, Dylan had and his colleague Justin had already gotten a really good start on it, but I think they and I and all the editors involved in this realized pretty soon that there was a lot here, and it was very complex. So you have, cities, companies, the federal government, the state government, individuals, lawsuits. There's a lot of paper and a lot of complex,
a lot of science, right?
A lot of science, right?
Science.
Yeah, interweaving kind of. So the first thing we did once I got involved was to kind of, first keep digging and pulling documents, which, we spent a lot of time kind of reading through dockets and looking through documents, but was just kind of starting to divvy up the work. Dylan had already established relationships with a lot of sources, but we needed a lot more reporting, obviously, to kind of bring something like this to print or to air. And so we started divvying up the work, and I kind of took the companies and some of the science. There were so many different victims we were talking to that I took some of them. So going to Dalton with Dylan was, necessary for this process, but also we were filming, so we had to be kind of physically in places that and do things. That was what's really great. And I know Aaron, you can talk about why Frontline got involved and stuff, but just from my perspective, what's really great about the way Frontline works is that from the beginning they were with us on the ground and starting to and kind of part of the process of uncovering what the story was. I mean, we didn't know who kind of we knew kind of the key players, of course, the companies, but we were still figuring out kind of who the people were that we would tell this story through, and which documents. And so they became, a partner at around the same time that I did, and we all just kind of ended up going there together for a week or so. I think I was there a week, and they were there a little less than that early on. But it really gave us a sense of kind of, okay, where are we? Who are the people that live here? What do these companies look like? What does the area look like? What does the river? You really have to be in these places for at least a little while. Like, none of us were there as much as Dylan or Justin, but if we're going to get into this like the way we needed to, we had to at least spend some time there and kind of try to understand it a little bit. And so that was a key part of the reporting for sure.
Yeah. And you guys, in addition to talking to people, like for those who have seen the film or will see it, Lisa Martin or the Jackson family, you also needed to and wanted to hear from everybody who was involved, anybody who would talk, right? So that included former employees, executives of some of the large carpet makers, right? What did they know? When did they know it? Others might include people at the utility, which has had a bit of a complicated relationship with the federal government over time, the local utility. And so you needed to actually find these people and get their side, right? And in some cases that means driving around, right? Dylan, why don't you just take us, first of all, who was driving? Was it Dylan or Jason? Which one was behind?
No, Jason was the driver. And this was actually sort of driven by him and his process. Obviously, we at the AJC are familiar with, doing everything we can to reach out to folks. But Jason had this two-pronged idea where not only do you door knock, you leave a physical letter at the home or in the mailbox to ensure that somebody sees something, right? Like that you cover all your bases in terms of awareness, even if they're not home or they don't want to answer the door. And so, yeah, I mean, we just picked a day, and actually Frontline was with us, which made it, really interesting to do this with a camera crew. And we printed out, a couple dozen letters because we had a lot of folks that, had their hands on this in terms of, perhaps knowledge of PFAS or knowledge of a certain process that we wanted to learn more about. And we just spent the day and the next couple days knocking doors, going from home to home, trying to get somebody to speak to us for the story. Because, as you noted, like you need to get every sort of perspective in the story. It's one thing to read documents and see that on paper, but it's another thing to, speak to somebody. And so, Jason and I, camera crew in tow, knocked on a couple doors, and, we didn't get initially the most enthusiastic response, but I think, I think it was really helpful. And it really makes a story feel like visceral in a way that it, going through documents, even talking to other sources, you go up to this person's house or you go into their neighborhood, and these folks live here. And it was a really, really interesting process.
You still get nervous knocking on that door, Jason? You've been doing this a little while. Do you still get that feeling of like, oh, what's going to happen?
Yeah, sometimes, especially, I worked in the South for a lot of years, and I remember one time a photographer and I were knocking on a door, and we didn't notice it until we were halfway up the walkway that there was a massive hog right in front of the door, just laying there. We didn't have any hogs in this one, but you never know what you're going to find. I love it. I think it's part of the job because I love talking to people. But this one showed you how important the carpet industry was to these communities. Because they knew why we were there, I think, for the most part, or were at least, kind of curious. We had one former executive for one of the companies kind of look through her blinds at us and talk to us a little bit about what we were doing there. We had, some other interactions with family members or and that kind of thing. And so it was just a good experience. And then we knew at the end of the day that we had, maybe someone doesn't see an email when you send it for comment, right? Or if you leave a message on a cell phone or something like that. So, but knowing that someone lives somewhere and that you left a physical thing, at least to me, is always, and that takes time and effort, and that's part of what this kind of accountability journalism is. We've all done a lot of different types of journalism where you make phone calls on deadline and you're trying to get somebody, but when you do this kind of work that is really making serious connections between, multi-billion-dollar international companies and harm in small communities, that's not good enough. And you need to go all the extra miles that you could do to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to engage with you and talk with you, and that they know that you're serious about it. So even though it wasn't super successful in terms of getting us someone to go on camera, Dylan and I also spent a lot of time together driving around. And I think it was one of those conversations where we're like, who are we going to get from one of the companies to talk to us? And he's like, oh, wait, I think I have a business card from a former executive that I met. So he'd already met someone who was willing to talk to him, and he'd been doing so much work. And that's what happens. You're going from here to here, you're reading tens of thousands of pages of documents. And it's sometimes the collaboration, what the best thing is just having someone to bounce things off of and spurring a memory or something. And that turned out to be a key person in our story.
I think that's Lisa Martin in the film, right?
Lisa Martin.
Yeah,
Right.
her business card was buried in a folder I had in a filing cabinet in my office from a group meeting I had with some people who watch PFAS, are following PFAS. They have this Facebook group, and I asked her if she could, put together a meeting. And there's this woman here who was not very talkative. She kind of came late, so I didn't get to speak to her. And she gave me her business card, and it was Lisa Martin. And it wasn't until after a couple months after Jason got there that I was racking my brain, and I was like, let me just go to my filing cabinet, and there it was. And she became, a key source, very key source for the story. So, it's a really, collaborating is a very interesting process because you can kind of get your blinders on, and kind of get stuck a little bit by yourself or, in a smaller group. So, yeah.
Aaron, you guys do, as Frontline, an august, long-standing, venerated institution, really, of American news. You do a lot of collaborating, including in your own program. Here we have two, what I would call print reporters, although I don't know exactly if I should call them print reporters. Text, word first, text people. You yourself have been a national writer, including at the AP. Now you're doing a different medium. And that comes with its own challenges, especially when the film medium, of course, you also do editing of pieces, and you were deeply involved, as we'll talk about that. But you have two reporters who are going out, and you are trying to tell a story about an odorless, colorless thing, and you are trying to do it in more than 50 minutes, but less than 60 minutes. That sounds like a challenging recipe, but this was so beautifully shot, and it really complemented the work that Jason and Dylan did. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of when it comes to accountability journalism, telling the story visually? We've heard about documents, we've heard about science, we've heard about a lot of dry things. How do you and your colleagues, your filmmaking colleagues and folks at Frontline kind of tell the story visually? And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the collaborations that you've done and the rigor and kind of the roadblocks that you guys have brought and overcome. But just starting with that, telling that story visually, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. As you said, I come from a text background. I have 15 years of newspaper and then AP experience, and so very much a writer. And I am my grounding is in, if we need to get from point A to point D in a story, you write that transition, right? But on film, we need to lead the viewers, lead the audience visually, as well as in terms of the script and the words that people hear. And so we think about, in this case, it was water. And one of the things that captured my attention and my imagination really very early on in the collaboration process was the idea that the rivers were carrying this contamination many hundreds of miles from one state to the next and into, the drinking supply of I think it was around 200,000 residents. And so just thinking visually, it was water. And I know, and as you see in the trailer and in the film, the team really homed in on that and spent a lot of time on rivers at different times of the day, picking up images of steam and boats and drinking water, because that's how not only does it travel across the land, but it gets into our bodies for the most part through drinking, although there are many other sources of PFAS. But in this case, the focus was on water. And so that was just a jumping off point. And then, of course, there are the typical film techniques, getting a reporter from his office to his car, or a source from her front porch into wherever. So we visually, follow people. And then the most challenging aspect is how do you translate the reporter's many thousands of pages of documents into something that people want to look at, right? And so we have an incredible team that does interactive graphics, maps that move around. We zoom in on pieces of text that may be interesting. But the most helpful thing is to have people talk us through whatever it is a reader might pick up in a newspaper article. We'll have someone talk us through that. So it is a very different way of storytelling. But I think, as Jason alluded to, as a writer, working with folks who are visually focused, actually, it improves our work. It gives us, it amplifies the visual aspect of the writing itself. So I think the two can work, and usually do work really well together. And what I love, I think I have one of the best jobs in journalism, that I get to do all of it. So I get to do the writing, not the originating the writing, but fiddling around with editing text and making suggestions in text, as well as the visuals. So it is it's extremely powerful to see how all of that interacts and amplifies each other.
Yeah, and I think also from the reporter's perspective, it's just fun to try storytelling in a new way, right? Jason, you've done this before, but Dylan, I think you're seeing the power of a different medium, right? And it's on the air, and it's shown now, and it's picking up buzz in the region in Northwest Georgia, including because, hey, there's that guy I saw him on the TV.
And there's something so accessible about just being able to click on the YouTube, which now has more than 350,000 views. But just to be able to play that trailer, play portions of the film. We're an increasingly visual news audience, just globally, and so I think that can never hurt, right? To have these stories translated that way.
Yeah, and I think when we start with what Dylan and I and Aaron is so good at doing too, when you start with a kind of a written story, whether it's a script or a text story. But these days, of course, that's just the beginning of the storytelling process. I mean, this story had obviously tons of social media resources put into it, and found all sorts of audiences online and through social networks. Of course, the film, and then pieces of the film have been used for social media campaigns. The print story went out and through multiple platforms, and did great, and got lots of attention. So yeah, it's I feel like it's been like that for a while now. Obviously, every time we do an investigation at AP or something, it rolls out into so many different formats that text is just kind of the acorn or the seed, you know, and then you get all of these different branches that come out of it. And I love that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I mean, when I'm out there up in Northwest Georgia, since all of this published, I mean, it's the film that people
Mhm.
recognize first. I mean, sometimes they don't recognize me because I got my haircut since the film aired.
Yeah, who are you?
And I'm getting mixed responses on that. But you know, the film really is a very accessible way for people. And there's people that, you know, have said they liked the print version and the written version. But, you know, the film is just it's easy to grasp for a lot of people. And like Aaron said, the way that you could just put it on, you know, click on YouTube and watch it, you know, makes it just so much easier for people to digest and you know, walk away understanding what's going on rather than reading, you know, 6,000 word story, which is daunting for some people. So, you know, it was good to have like this sort of total rollout. And because so much of journalism now is, you know, is getting it in front of people. And so having all these different ways to do so and different, not just, you know, having a glossy digital rollout, but having it, you know, on a visual medium and things like that was really helpful for, you know, driving impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's Aaron, let's stick with you. And
Mhm.
Frontline has, and I've experienced it as a reporter on a different project, or as a contributor on a different project, of extremely rigorous fact checking and legal process. AP does as well, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution does as well. So that means there's a lot of you know, what we call legal, so a legal review, and standards. Of course, you know, journalism, professional journalists, news organizations have standards, have statements. The AP has a statement of news values and principles. It talks about, you know, what we can say and what we can't say, and, you know, how we can say it and how we can't say it, and any number of things to make sure that we're upholding the credibility and the standards of the AP. And so there was a very intensive review that goes into this, and I think that's an important point to make, because this is, you know, this is the truly unglamorous side of this type of journalism. I mean, you know, on you might bookend it with Jason and Dylan, you know, spending dozens of hours reading through court transcripts and court records, right, and creating this massive timeline. Jason, I'm surprised you haven't used this word yet in describing how you got here. Yes, the timeline of you know, to help organize and draw connections. Once it's written and, you know, edited to a point where it can be you know, can be reviewed by the legal and standards folks, we sort of locked ourselves in these Zoom rooms several days in a row. In some cases, we'd skip a day for hours at a time, and just take us there.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, those were fun Zoom rooms. It was intense, right? There are several reporters, several editors. There are standards experts. There are legal counsel for each news organization. So those are big meetings, and we're going literally word for word, line by line through the stories. As Dylan said, it's, you know, these are thousands of words long, and making sure that, of course, we always will make sure everything is true, right? We have hundreds of footnotes on an article like this. I don't even remember how many we had ultimately. It was 300-400. I mean, it was, you know, for every single fact, there may be multiple sources. So that's a given before we even walk into the room with lawyers. But in the case of this story, where there's so much corporate accountability, that and that's the laser focus of the story. What do these carpet industries executives know? When did they know it? And what should they have done to mitigate this problem? Are we being fair to these folks? Are we in danger of overstating, saying more than we actually can prove? And so there were, I recall, half-hour debates over one word. Because one lawyer thinks this and another lawyer thinks that, and the reporters say yes, but, and we go round and round until there were times when it's like, we'll take it back to committee and see what we can do. And there are times we decided in the moment, this is the most fair, accurate, and legally sound way to express this. And many times it wasn't very poetic. I know for Jason and Dylan, it was like, that's not the way we would, it's maybe not the most engaging, but it's fair and it's legally sound. And that's 1,000% the approach we take to this and to really everything we do at Frontline.
Yeah, and you mentioned fair and accurate. I think another important thing about this, and this brings in an Atlanta Journal-Constitution practice on their investigative team that Brad Schrade, I think, may have started, but it brings in the accountability letter. And so there's fairness, there's accuracy, and then there's balance, right? And so we want to get as much balance from the carpet companies, from the local utility that I had mentioned, was receiving this wastewater and then processing it. Can you just, have you seen something like that? You do a lot of collaborations with other newsrooms. I'm wondering, and before you answer that, Dylan, could you just briefly describe this accountability letter? What is that?
Yeah, so this is a standard practice for an investigative team. It's basically no surprises, guys, right? You're going to know what material we're considering for the story, how it's going to be described in, as much as we can, in what context we're going to use it, and we're going to send it to you in the form of questions so that you have an opportunity to respond to each and every single basically mention or reference to your company or your person in the story. And so these are, could sometimes run 40 questions. That went out to each major source in the story. And as detailed as possible. And, it's a practice we've had because we find there's no real downside to it. And two, it gets companies to engage. I mean, we got companies and folks to engage with us in a serious way when they see these things on paper. They see the sort of scope and breadth of what and specificity of what we're reporting out. So it's a great practice that we use all the time.
Yeah, and indeed, as you mentioned, you did, and to my surprise, I must admit, you did get an on-the-record interview with one of the with an executive at one of the carpet makers, and that turned out to be a very important interview and the follow-up correspondence, including because we really got to the point where we understood their points.
Yeah,
we want to accurately reflect their points, right? We truly do. So that process, which was a new one to me as well. Erin, have you seen one like that? The accountability letter process, exactly?
I have. Yes, they're called no surprises letters, as Dylan said.
There you go.
I'm on a different project now that has done the same. It is the right of anyone whose name, company's name, the state, could be a government agency's name. If you're going to be called out in public, we're going to give you every opportunity, bend over backwards multiple times to make sure you have a chance to know what's coming and answer to it in a full-throated way. And then as Dylan said, folks will send in long responses. We send 60 questions, and they may send 20 pages back. So then what do? Well, you don't print 20 pages. And that starts the whole process over again about distilling the facts and making sure that we're being really fair to this entity, this person, to capture and reflect what they've said, both through paraphrasing and quotes in the piece. So yes, it's an essential part of the process. Not everybody does it. It's nerve-wracking. It's time-consuming. Because those letters take a long time to put together, right? But it's essential. Yeah.
Yeah. So all this has come together. We've got through the legal and standards process. We've hit the button, as they say. It's public. The film has aired. The reporting is out there. Our partners at AL.com and the Post and Courier in Charleston have published as well. Dylan, this reporting has had immediate and real impact, including because this Northwest Georgia area is the former seat of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman who resigned. And so it's actually become a campaign issue as well, subsequent to the publication and airing. Can you talk about the impact? What's it like up there now? There's civic centers filled with people, protests at a local restaurant. Take us there.
Yeah, in true AP style, I did not get a chance to breathe after the story published and immediately started following the sort of political implications of it. I mean, we timed the story in a way to coincide with the state legislature being in session in Georgia. And while the legislature is in session, there's also the election up in Northwest Georgia where this all takes place. Which was a seat once occupied by Marjorie Taylor Greene. She decided to resign and the seat became open, and PFAS became sort of a key issue in that race. And I'd say a bipartisan one. There's all different degrees of lip service, but few politicians in that race would come out and look at everything that's going on with their constituents and say, everything's hunky-dory here. There was a lot of attention to this issue. Some candidates made it personal. The candidate eventually won, Clay Fuller. He came out shortly after our story came out and told a story about how he had thyroid cancer and he blamed PFAS. And so it immediately became a very pressing issue. I mentioned the legislature. There were bills going through the legislature that dealt with PFAS. One that would have shielded carpet companies from legal liability in a lot of these PFAS lawsuits, which generated a lot of outrage, both among the grassroots residents, but also in debates for the congressional race. It was widely derided, these sort of legal liability shield mechanisms. So, and then, as Justin mentioned, we also, have more grassroots action. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I was in a convention hall with almost 1,000, more than 600 people, and they were all talking PFAS. There was Aaron Brockovich was there. It was a town hall put together by one of these legal plaintiffs group that's doing a lot of testing up in Northwest Georgia. And so the impact was pretty immediate. A lot of these bills none of these bills really made it anywhere in the legislature. We're always looking for whether they'll come back. They probably will in some form or another. But the election happened, but they're going to have to go back to the polls in November. It was a special election. So this stuff will stick around for a while. And the energy is not going to abate after this.
Yeah.
That's sort of to the film where we're playing screenings, things like that. Having a long tail on a lot of this stuff is very important. And the fact that we have the ability to show something to a mass audience is going to be really helpful in like just keeping up the pressure and the energy for this sort of reporting.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is as I said, I was looking forward to doing this, talking to you all, and sharing the story, both the story itself and the story behind the story, because I do think that, the time it takes, the care it takes, the diligence, the resource intensive work of investigative journalism is real. Those are real things. And indeed, we are in an uncertain time in a lot of ways, right? As an industry. And indeed, there have been each of our institutions over the course of this project has had challenges with regard to staffing and layoffs and just kind of, revenue questions and any number of things.
Mhm.
So, I wonder, Jason, if you can just kind of take it from there in terms of in this context. How optimistic or not are you that the press can continue to perform this vital function of accountability, whether it's on the local level, in a regional level, nationally? Where do you sit on that?
Well, it's hard to be optimistic right now, given everything that's going on. Technological disruption, a contracting press in the U.S. in terms of numbers. So many of our colleagues have been laid off or lost their jobs. That I think it's really important for people leading these organizations to maintain a commitment to doing accountability journalism and investigative journalism, even though we're in a really tough time. Where I get optimism is in collaborations like this, where in a time where we're all trying to do our jobs, which are, this is key to accountability journalism, is key to our country's democracy. It's key to, a functioning democracy. And we just need to keep doing it. And it's collaborations like this that allow us the resources, right? So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's investigations team, AP's investigations teams, Frontline, like together we're much stronger and we do much deeper work and can pool our resources. And so that's what I see that gives me optimism. And I hope that there's a commitment among people who are running our organizations to continue these types of collaborations, because they're vital. And it's an honor to work in this business, and no one, I think, takes it for granted. But at the same time, like, we can't do it alone. We need support. And so, to everybody who's watching, who does support AP and other organizations, that's really key. And you should demand that as part of that support, that this type of reporting is key to you coming back. So I think that's kind of where I stand on everything.
Yeah. Can I add to that and just put in a plug for local journalism?
Please,
Because
please do.
research actually shows that this is the kind of work that audiences, subscribers will want and will pay for. When it comes to building subscriberships at local news outlets, which, as everybody knows, are losing audiences, losing subscribers, many newspapers shrinking, no longer publishing, or in some cases just disappearing altogether. When those outlets are gone, accountability just dries up in communities, and corruption goes through the roof. There's a lot of data on this. And so when we are stronger together, as Jason says, doing this kind of work, it's the kind of thing that can help tilt those scales a little bit back toward proving and showing audiences just how important journalism can be to their everyday lives. So that's my spiel. I firmly believe it, and I hope audiences will join us on this bandwagon. Be a subscriber.
Well, thank you for that, Aaron. Thank you, a huge thank you, really, to you and to Dylan and to Jason for your time and sharing how this really remarkable investigation came to be. Thanks to everyone for watching. Your support, as we were just talking about, is what helps make journalism like this possible, at least in part. And so if you enjoyed this conversation, as I hope you did, please consider donating at apnews.com/donate or by scanning the QR code on the screen. And then please also, either way, join us tomorrow as we continue AP's Press Freedom Week. Thank you again, and best